Ever feel like you're drowning in information? We get it. That's why on the deep dive, we cut through the noise and go deep on the stuff that really matters.
Absolutely.
And today we're diving into something super practical for any coder out there. When to refactor. We've got a great stack of articles here all about spotting those so-called code smells. You know the ones, right?
Yeah. Basically, it's like a checkup for your code. Refactoring, making sure it's healthy on the inside, easy to work with, easy to understand, easy to maintain, and ready for whatever you want to add to it later. But all without changing how it actually, functions. We're going to give you the signs to watch out for when that checkup is overdue.
I love that analogy. And our sources really nail it with this idea of code smells. It's that feeling when something's off, even if there's not like a 5-alarm fire.
Yeah.
It's like that weird smell in your fridge, You're not sure what's causing it, but you got to investigate.
Right. And often those smells are kind of like symptoms of deeper issues. One of the big ones is feature creep. Kind of like when you keep adding layers to a cake, but you don't reinforce the base, eventually the whole thing's going to collapse. Same with code. You keep piling on features without thinking about the original design, and you end up with this mountain of technical debt.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's like building a city with new roads all the time, but without any overall plan. Traffic just gets worse and worse. Or in our case, it's bugs and maintenance headaches.
Right.
Another one that really jumped out was this idea of cognitive load. Our notes mentioned that some devs, they start to feel the strain when files hit around 100 lines of code, or like functions get longer than 10 lines. Not hard and fast rules or anything, but more like personal red flags that things might be getting a bit too dense to wrap your head around easily. It's all about keeping it simple, right?
Yeah.
Each file, each function, doing just one thing well.
Totally. I mean, when code gets super messy, it's like hacking through a jungle just to make tiny changes.
I can imagine.
And that brings us to the next big code smell. When the difficulty level, skyrockets. So, fixing a small bug or adding a tiny new feature, and suddenly it takes, forever. You have to understand this whole massive system just to make a small tweak. That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
One article actually mentioned the story about a really simple action. It was for a confirmation dialog box, and they said it was near impossible to implement just because the code was such a mess.
Oof. That's rough.
Yeah.
And a lot of times this kind of complexity, it rears its ugly head as, performance issues, like your application suddenly slows down for no apparent reason. And when you do profiling, to see where the code is spending all its time, there's not one big bottleneck.
Yeah.
There's tons of little slowdowns everywhere. That can definitely be a sign of some underlying code smells. I thought it was super interesting, though. One source actually talked about this example where a 90-second pagination issue got shrunk down to under 2 seconds just by refactoring for clarity, even before they found the main performance problem.
Right. That makes sense, though.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Cleaner code makes it way easier to spot the real bottlenecks.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about making the code run faster. It's about making it, easier to work with in the first place.
For sure. And if we kind of zoom out a bit, another thing that can trigger the need for refactoring is, changing best practices, like programming standards. They evolve. Code that was perfectly fine a while back might look totally outdated now.
Yeah, that's true.
And make it harder for others to jump in and contribute. Sticking to the latest best practices isn't just about being trendy. It's about making sure everyone's on the same page. And, makes onboarding new team members so much easier.
100%. But one thing that's super important to remember is refactoring isn't about trying to get perfect code right off the bat.
No.
It's a process, right? Our sources really stress that it's iterative. You might refactor 5-10 times, even in early stage projects.
Yeah. It's like a constant process of improvement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere, tackle the worst smell first, and go from there.
Exactly. And that kind of leads to an interesting question, what happens if you open up your code and you're hit with a whole wall of bad smells?
Right.
I mean, where do you even begin? One suggestion we saw was to do a code audit. The whole team gets together, reviews the code base, list out all the issues based on, your agreed upon best practices and coding principles.
It sounds like a good starting point.
Yeah.
I mean, at least it gives you a roadmap.
Yeah.
And then there's the nuclear option. In really extreme cases, code bankruptcy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Where you basically just scrap the whole thing and start over, applying everything you've learned using the latest and greatest libraries.
I can see that being useful for prototypes that you throw away a lot, where you've gained a lot of insights along the way.
For sure. So, to recap quickly, Here are the big code smells to watch out for. When feature creep starts to make your system feel fragile, or if there's so much cognitive load that the code becomes really hard to understand, or if simple tasks suddenly become super difficult, mysterious performance slowdowns, and yeah, if your code base basically looks like it belongs in a museum.
Yeah, that's a good list.
At the end of the day, refactoring is all about making your code more manageable, easier to understand, maintain, and grow with. And ultimately, that saves everyone a ton of time and headaches down the road.
Sure.
So listeners, take a second to think about your own projects. Do any of these code smells sound familiar? What's one small step you could take today, to make your code just a little bit cleaner, to have a slightly tidier fridge of code?
Yeah, I like that. Tidy fridge.
Thanks for tuning into the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.